Hey everybody, Anthony Gonzalez here, certifiable teacher, and I want to talk to you a little bit about literacy, literacy in young kids, in young age kids. So a little background: for the past 5 years, I'd worked in Title I schools here in the state of Texas, and what a Title I means is that a school can be classified for different things depending on the makeup of the population that surrounds it. That means that, say, for example, if there is an elementary school in any particular neighborhood, and that neighborhood is a little more well-to-do, that has dual income parents that can afford nice things and that sort of thing, the government, the state of Texas, will look at that school and say this school probably does not need a whole lot of help in acquiring new books, in acquiring technology, in children being able to eat their breakfast or afford breakfast or lunch or anything like that. Okay? It's just demographics. And there are other schools, like the ones that I used to work at, Title I schools, that they would look at the makeup of the population surrounding it, and it was a little different. Struggling parents, single parent households, parents working two jobs, trying to provide for their kids, doing the best they can in the situation that is given to them. The state of Texas will look at this school and say, okay, the parents might be having a little trouble, say, feeding their kids or, say, giving them clothing or that sort of thing. We are going to provide funds to this school so that they can get the things that they need. It might be something as simple as budgeting some money, Title I funds coming to this school so that it can afford new computers, or it could be a whole new renovation of the school, or it could also be enough money provided to the entire school for the entire student body to be able to eat breakfast or lunch and provide clothing if needed. The schools that I was working at, they would provide these sorts of things. If there was a student who, say, it was winter and it was cold outside and it was rainy and wet and you did not want to be out there without a jacket. Well, sometimes we had students who would come without jackets, not because their parents didn't want to provide them one, didn't want to buy them one. They certainly did, but because maybe they didn't have the money to get them one, and the school would provide them one. They would go out and they would buy them with money that was provided to them, and they would buy them one, and they would have a closet full of them. And if you needed a jacket, if you just came in a sweater and that's all you had, that's all your parents could get you, and that's all they could afford, and they were trying to work to get more, then the school would give you a jacket. And they say, this is your jacket now. You don't have to share it with anybody. This is yours. You don't have to bring it back. You don't have to give it back. You don't have to wash it and bring it back. This is your jacket. You keep it. Okay? So that's the kind of schools that I was working at, Title I schools. Um, and the kids who come to those schools, the students, were from very different background than a lot of us might understand. And what I mean by that is you don't understand what it is to be in poverty. You might have an intellectual understanding of it. Okay, this is the situation for these parents or the guardians of these children, because often the students are not placed with their parents. They might be with their uncles or aunts or grandparents, or they might even be in foster care. Okay, so intellectually you might know all of this. Oh yeah, these sorts of things happen. But it's a totally different thing to see it with your eyes. Okay? To be hit in the face with it. It's kind of like being a parent. You don't understand what it's like to be a parent until it actually happens to you. I remember that very clearly, what it was like to not have kids and then all of a sudden do have kids, and the way that your life changes radically. And so when you see the kind of situation that these kids are in, your understanding of them changes rapidly. Your understanding of the world changes rapidly. Okay, you might be content knowing this is my little bubble of the world. Okay, this is what I know to be true, but there's a whole nother world that you don't even know about until it's opened up to you. And this is the kind of schools that these kids are at. They, like I said, they might come from single parent homes where the parent is working two jobs to maintain a household. They might be placed with grandparents. They might be placed with aunts or uncle, or who knows. The point is, these kids have very, very rough backgrounds and very, very rough upbringing so far. And it manifests, these problems manifest in different ways. They could be violent behaviors, they could be outbursts at school, they could be any kind of adverse behavior that you're going to see. It's not just because the student is being bad because they want to be. Okay, they are reacting to something that's happening at home. They are reacting to circumstances that they can't change. And they're usually not great circumstances. Now, what did I do when I was at this Title I school, and why am I talking about literacy? Well, I worked for the past couple years in something called intervention. What intervention is, there are several intervention teachers on most campuses. Okay? And intervention is exactly what it sounds like. We are intervening on the behalf of the students if, for whatever reason, they might not be performing to the level that they should. Okay? It was my job at the beginning of the school year to go into different classrooms from grades 3 through 6, and I would assess each and every student in each and every class on their reading. And I had standardized tests online that I would give out to everyone, and they would all take it. And it was of course to me, it was a very simple test. You sit down and you read a little passage, and then you answer a question that they ask you about that passage. For example, the passage might say something like, Johnny was riding his bike, and it was getting hard to see, and he was hoping that the reflectors on his spokes would protect him from cars driving by. And the question would say, when is Johnny riding his bike? Morning, night, evening, daytime? And it was up to the students to infer that, well, it was probably dusk, it was probably evening time, if it was getting darker and harder to see, and the reflectors on the bike were supposed to protect him. The question didn't say anything about it was pitch black and he couldn't see and the moon was out, or the sun was coming up and the birds were singing, or he could see perfectly where he was going. All right, it was up to them to infer. Inference is a big part of reading in our schools, okay? Having to infer information, to understand what it is you're reading. So I would give them this test, and I would see which ones did great, which ones did okay, which ones might have needed a little bit of help. And the ones who needed help, the ones who qualified for my program, and it was a specific program, they would come to me and I would help them out throughout the entire school year. And I noticed a few things doing this for 3 years, doing this for a while, across the board about literacy. And I'm going to relate to you a little bit about it. When I was a kid, I hated to read, and I have that in common with a lot of the kids that I worked with. I hated to read. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, on through, I did not like doing it. I wasn't good at it. And I felt inferior to other kids who could read well. Not that I couldn't read well. I had some problems with it. I had problems with vowels. And I had problems with words that were spelled the same, but meant different things in different contexts. For example, the word read and read. It's spelled the same. You could read it the same. But if there was a paragraph that said, Kelly's parents took her to the library yesterday, she picked out a book all by herself, and when she got home, she read it. Well, if you're not reading for understanding, If you're not understanding what it is you are looking at, if I asked a child to read this paragraph to me and I said, just go ahead and read it the way you see it, well, they might not be reading to understand it. They don't have something that's called fluency. You're not understanding what you're reading. You're just looking at the words and you're fighting to understand each word that's on the paper, to pronounce each word that's on the paper, to get it out of your mouth, so that it won't be your turn anymore and you can rest while somebody else reads their turn. If you don't get the context clues that Kelly went to the library yesterday, that Kelly picked out the book yesterday, past tense, then you're not going to understand that the word is read and not read. Well, I had a problem with that when I was a young boy. And I didn't like to read, and I felt bad about it. Honestly, I didn't feel good about not being able to read. Well, not wanting to read for fun, for entertainment, I, as a child, was very imaginative. I still am. Excuse me. And I would have rather been outside playing around, imagining a scenario and playing it out than I would have been inside holding a book in front of my face, reading somebody else's imagination. I didn't want to do that. I had my own. I wanted to go outside. I wanted to have fun. And I will tell you where it turned around for me and how you might be able to help out your own child or your own student. It was very simple. It was 1993. I was 11 years old. I didn't like to read. All right, so that's 4th, 5th grade, somewhere around there. And there happened to be a particular movie coming out in theaters in that year that was going to be the biggest movie anyone had ever seen. It was the most ambitious. It was directed by Steven Spielberg himself. It was going to make billions and billions of dollars. And it did. And it was called Jurassic Park. I know some of you out there remember when it was released. Everybody was touting it as the most technologically advanced. It was a movie in generations. It was a leap forward in filmmaking, in movie making, in storytelling. They were using new technologies to animate dinosaurs coming to life on an island, attacking people. People's trying to survive. It was going to be amazing. And to think that somebody else could come up with a story like that and make a movie about it, I can't tell you how intrigued I was. It was eye-opening. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. And so back in 1993, of course, some of you know, there wasn't a whole lot of internet back then. It was around, but not everybody had it. And so it was very difficult to try and get information about something that you were interested in. If we would go to the store, I would ask my mom if I could go over to the magazine section, and I would look for magazines that had anything to do with Jurassic Park, and I would open them up and I would try and read it. This was the beginning of me wanting to read, to want to learn how to read. Right? So I was trying to absorb as much information as I could about this one particular subject. And I remember one day, clear as day, I still remember it, all these years later, we were standing in the checkout of our local grocery store in El Paso, Texas, the middle of the desert. And my mom was putting the groceries on the conveyor belt, and it was moving across, and they were scanning it, and I was looking around, and I turned around and I looked, and of course there was the candy, and I really wanted a candy. Now my mom wasn't the type, she would get us some every now and then, but my mom wasn't the type to buy us something all the time. If I asked for a toy, if I asked for something like that, she would say, no, you don't need that. You know, a lot of mothers are like that. No, you don't need that. That's fine. You have toys at home. Let's go. I turned around and I was looking at that rack where they had the candies and the gum and all that stuff. And right there was a copy of Jurassic Park, written by Michael Crichton. I couldn't believe it. There it was, the real thing. I had found out before that the movie was based on a book written by a man. And the book was out there. And of course, you know, whenever there's a movie coming out that's based on the book, anywhere you go, you're going to see that movie promoted. You're going to see it pushed real hard because the publishers of that book, well, we got a movie coming out based on our book, based on the book that our guy wrote. We're gonna push it really hard in in stores, bookstores, anywhere you go, Target, Walmart, that place, so you can see it, so it's going to get visible. So not only are they going to buy the book, but they're going to be interested in going to see the movie at the same time. So there it was. And I turned around and I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, can I have that book? It was probably the first time I had ever asked for a book. Now, this was a big book. It was about 300 or 400 pages long. I had never read anything like that before. The longest book I had read to that point was probably 70, 80 pages. You know, a little kid book. She looked at the book. She looked at me. She said, okay. Maybe it was because I never asked for something like that before. Maybe it was because it was the first time I'd gone out of my way to say, can you get me something to read? So she gets it and she buys it for me. One of the few times that my mother ever bought me something on the spot at a store. I mean, she would, if it was planned, we would go out and get things or whatever, or she would give me money to go and buy a candy, or she would give me money if we were at a mall and I wanted to go to the arcade when there used to be arcades. She would give me money and go with me. So it wasn't like she didn't want me to ever do anything. But this was the first time that I asked for a book, like I said. So she bought it for me, and I took it home, and immediately I started to read it. And it was not easy, especially for a little 11-year-old boy, because it was a lot of hard science. Now, if you know anything about Michael Crichton as an author, he was, so I'm pretty sure he was an MD, he was a doctor. And he was very, very smart. And, of course, he wrote science fiction books. A lot of his books are science fiction, speculative fiction. But there was some real science in those books, in all of his books. He would go out and he would read reports, and he would read journals, and he would interview scientists, and he would say, what is the cutting edge of science in this particular field? And in the case of Jurassic Park, it had to do with genetics. It had to do with cloning. It had to do with building a major theme park and the troubles that go along with that. And all this stuff coming together, and the philosophy of doing something like this. If you remember the movie, there's a character named Ian Malcolm where he gets very upset at the fact that the park owner, John Hammond, he tells them, you were so excited about whether or not, about if you could create these dinosaurs, you didn't stop to think about whether you should. Now, his character is fleshed out more in the book. All of that stuff was really hard to understand as an 11-year-old boy. And me running home and immediately laying down on my bed and opening it up and starting to read the first page, it was a little heartbreaking. It wasn't easy. Here I am trying to understand things about genetics. Here I am trying to understand things about missing pieces of DNA. I didn't even know what DNA was. Here I am trying to understand the cloning process. We're still trying to figure that out. We barely cloned a sheep, and not even perfectly, okay? Or even if we should. But this was a story about dinosaurs. And I knew somewhere in there the dinosaurs were going to get loose, and it was just going to go crazy. I would say it took me about 2 or 3 years to read that book. The first day I sat down and I started reading it, and I started trying to read it, and I slowed down, and I slowed down, and I slowed down, and I stopped. And I put it aside, and I did not pick it up again for a very long time. But I looked over at the book every now and then in my room, and I would try and pick it up, and I would try and read a little more. The first half of it's very dry and very boring. I went back to it not too long ago, maybe a couple years ago, and it still is. It's the first half of the book still is dry. It's a lot of backstory, and it's a lot of building up of a mystery. But it's not easy reading for an 11-year-old kid. But I worked at it, and I worked at it, and I worked at it. And I was proud to say that I did read that entire book, beginning to end, all the way through. And for me, it was a triumph. I had never read a book more, like I said, more than 70, 80 pages. And Michael Crichton became, and this is the tip that I want to give to you to help your children, to help your students. Find an author that's going to be your favorite. Michael Crichton became my favorite author. Okay, he became my favorite author. And he was a celebrated best-selling author. Not everyone was crazy about him, because he did some other books later on that people weren't too crazy about, and that's neither here nor there. But the point is, he can write a good story. He could write a good story. And when I went to junior high and to high school especially, in high school I was a little lost again on what to read. We had assignments where you had to read any kind of story, and you had to take quizzes on them that are called Accelerated Reader, AR. You might recognize that from your students coming home. We still do AR tests. You read a book, you take an AR quiz on it. They give you a score. Some schools, the school that I was working at, your score is good enough. At the end of the year, they take the highest scores and they take them on a fun field trip. But you have to be reading. They're trying to incentivize reading. I had a teacher in high school. I was falling behind. We had just moved to a new city, and these are some of the problems that students now are facing, and that I went through too, so I understand them. We just moved to a new city. I had left all my friends behind. I was very introverted, and it was very hard for me to make new friends, especially freshman year. I was alone. I was sad. I did not want to do my work. I did not want to do any kind of reading. And this teacher saw me. She saw that I had intelligence, that I was smart, that I could write things down, and I could read things if I needed to, if I had to. I didn't want to, but I could. She said, "Do you have a favorite author?" I said, "I read Jurassic Park starting in 5th grade, and I didn't finish it until I was in 8th grade. I really liked it." So, well, what about anything else? Do you like any other? Okay, well, that's fine. Michael Crichton, that's fine. I suggest you go out and you find more books of his. Do you like any other kind of book? My sister had the entire collection of Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I read them because they were AR, because they would help me get past things. And she said, "I noticed you reading these Chronicles of Narnia books. Did you enjoy them?" Well, yeah, I did. She said, the author of Chronicles of Narnia books, C.S. Lewis, was friends with a man named J.R.R. Tolkien. And here's another tip. Get 2 favorite authors. You need to go to the library and you need to find a book called The Fellowship of the Ring. The 2 are kind of the same. Well, before that, no. She said, what you need to do is you need to go to the library. You need to find a book called The Hobbit. The Hobbit is a little easier to read. Luckily, there was a library close to my house. And this was another thing where I went to my mom and I said, "Mom, can you take me to the library, please?" I hadn't done that. I hadn't done that in a long time, if ever. And she took me. And there was a copy of The Hobbit. Then I went to another section, and there was a copy of a book called The Lost World by Michael Crichton. Oh, and I started reading them. And I couldn't stop. I read all of The Hobbit, and I figured it was a good backstory for what was coming next. I went to Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, read all of that one. The Two Towers, read all of that one. The Return of the King, read all of that. Took all the quizzes on them, aced them, because I was enjoying what I was reading. Got The Lost World by Michael Crichton, the sequel to Jurassic Park. Read it, couldn't stop. Actually bought that book. Found another one called Airframe by Michael Crichton about the aviation industry. About there is an accident on an airplane. It doesn't crash, but something is wrong with one of the wings. Airplane is going up and down and up and down, and people are not adequately strapped in. They didn't have any warning. People are dying. They're losing their lunch. They're falling all over the cabin. Read that one. Bought that book. My favorite book of his, Sphere, that deals with psychology, that deals with psychiatry, under the water. Mind-bending book. I hate the ocean, and I hate everything that has to do with the ocean. I don't even like going to the beach. I will, and I can appreciate it for how beautiful it can be, but I don't like going out because who knows what's out there. And Michael Crichton plays on those fears because a group of scientists have to go under the ocean and into a laboratory down at the bottom of the ocean because they found a spaceship that crash landed there, but it didn't crash land any time in the recent past. It's thousands of years old. Why is it thousands of years old? Why does it look like it was built by humans? What is inside of it? They find a perfect sphere. And the mystery is what's going on. Can you get inside the sphere? What's inside the sphere? What's going to happen if you open it? The best book I've ever read. I went from a little boy who hated anything to do with reading to finding a favorite author. And that's the tip. You at home might not know how to help your child with reading. And it might be very frustrating if there's any kind of reading homework that's brought home and you say, okay, what homework do you have when you get home? Well, I have math and I have science and I have this reading assignment that I have to do. I have to read 2 or 3 pages, or I have to read this paragraph and I have to paraphrase it, or I have to look up whatever. And you know that reading is not easy for your child. And they sit down and they are struggling. The weather tomorrow is going to be sunny. And you were sitting there and you were listening to your child struggle with it. It's not easy. First you feel, maybe you start feeling a little pity. And then you get angry. You've gone over this word before. The word is sunny. You've read it 100 times. And it doesn't stick. I don't understand why. That kind of reaction and those kind of things, while natural, are very, very detrimental. And I'm sure you know this too. A lot of parents, they feel a lot of guilt. Is there something wrong with my child? Why can't I help him or her do these kinds of things? Finding a favorite author it helped me. I don't know if it'll help you, but it might be something you might want to look into. I will tell my students, there are all kinds of books about all kinds of things. Anything that you can think of, there is a book about it. Okay, and at my schools, the majority of the boys wanted to know about sports, of course. About sports heroes, about playing the sport, about where different kinds of sports are played, bloopers, that sort of thing, whatever. There are millions of books about sports, but they don't know to look for them unless somebody tells them. You want to know about the life of Michael Jordan? Sure, there are hundreds of books written about him. You want to know the life story of Emmitt Smith. Well, sure, there are lots of books about him. You want to know about Babe Ruth. You want to know about Dan Marino. Who knows? Whoever. There are books about all kinds of sports people. Okay? You want to know LeBron James. All kinds of books. But they're not going to know unless somebody tells them. And I would tell them, there's a book about this in the library, in our school library. I guarantee it. Let's go down there and find one. Written in language that will be easy for you. I want to know about ghost stories. I want to know about scary things. It's out there. They're there. Literacy can't just be a thing that happens in school. It has to start at home. It has to start with you reading to your child. It's as simple as that. Instilling in them the love of reading. My parents did a lot of good things for me. Many, many good things that I love them for very much. But if there's one thing that I can say that they didn't do too well, even they did try, was to try and instill a love for reading. I had to work on that on my own. Now I'll read anything and everything. I love to read. I love to read anything. I love to learn new things. I love to read things about history. Like I said before, I love to read things about fantasy, sci-fi. Later on in my life, I got very into Tom Clancy books, military, that sort of thing. Another thing that helped me out a good deal. Here's my latest. Okay. Michael Crichton, Dragon Teeth. Michael Crichton died of cancer in the late 2000s, 2007, I believe. This book came out, was published in 2008 is when he died. 2008. This book was published in the year 2017. He's still writing books. He's still making books. They keep finding new manuscripts of his, and they just get somebody else to finish it up, touch it up a little bit, because it was really rough. The man is still selling books. He's been dead for 2008. He's been dead for 11 years. Now, another thing that really helped me. It doesn't have to be a book. One thing I would tell my students all the time, it does not have to be a book. I don't care what you read. If you're going to go out and you're going to read Captain America comics, if you're going to go out and you're going to read something on the internet, if you're going to look out the window of your car while you're driving by and you're seeing stop signs and you're seeing the names of stores, I do not care what it is you are reading as long as you are doing it. Something that helped me, it didn't have to be a book, right here. Calvin and Hobbes, 10th anniversary book. I said before that I was a child who had a very big imagination. Calvin, there he is, was just like me. He was a little sad. It wasn't easy for him to make friends. He had to imagine one in his stuffed tiger, Hobbes. He didn't do the best in school, which I could relate to. He was bullied. His parents got angry with him frequently because he didn't do good in school, because he wasn't paying attention. But he would go outside to the woods behind his house with his best friend, Hobbes, and imagine scenarios. He was a dinosaur. He was a spaceman. He was fighting aliens. He was riding in his wagon, going on adventures. The imagination in these books, and the titles of the books too. This is only one of them. This is only one that I have. I have several others that I have saved since my adolescence to teen years, and I have saved them because I am planning on giving them to my own son when he's old enough to read, because of how much it helped me. Because here was a boy who understood the same things. Well, not a boy, the writer, Bill Watterson. He understood what it was like to be a kid. According to me, anyway. He understood what it was like to not be able to interact with other students very well. In school, I was designated as the weird kid. I was the weird kid because I did weird things. I didn't like sports all that much. I didn't like the latest fashion trends. I had to conform to those things so that I would fit in better. But in the early 90s, if you're a kid who wanted to read comic books, and you're a kid who wanted to play video games, and you're a kid who was interested in mythological creatures and monsters and that sort of thing, especially in where I grew up, it didn't go over well. I had to conform to a specific way of living so that I could successfully integrate into the society that I was a part of. The school, church. It was expected of young kids, of the boys, to like certain things. You had to like sports. You had to know all the rules to sports. I didn't, but I had to learn them. You had to like fast cars. You had to dress a certain way. I didn't want to do all of those things, but I had to do them. And my escape was with these Calvin and Hobbes books. Because here's another boy that was going through the same thing. Another favorite author. He doesn't even write books. He draws them. And they were funny and they were sad because they reflected who I was. So please, in your own home, the only way to instill any kind of love of reading is first do it yourself. Ask your students, ask your kids, what is it that you like to read? What are you interested in? Because we will go to the library, we will find books about that, and I will help you to read it. Ask them these things. Ask questions. I would tell my students, in all of your other classes, they tell you this a lot. You're going to need this one day. Especially you hear it in like math class. One day you're going to use this every day. Math, you're going to use it every day. You're going to use it here when you're trying to make a budget, when you're trying to figure out which bills to pay, when you're going out to maybe buy a house or buy a car or whatever. You're going to use math every day. I said, yes, sure, okay, fine. I'm not a math guy. I'm a word guy. You are going to read every day. If it's, like I said, a sign going by while you're driving. If it's the latest dumb celebrity rumor on the internet. If it's the instruction book of a video game. You're going to find something that you want to read. You might as well be good at it. Do it at home. Ask questions. Get to know your student as a reader.